Good day, everyone, wherever you are, wherever you're watching this. Before we even begin our conversation and our wonderful guest that we have today, please feel free to subscribe and like our YouTube channel and video as we have interesting and informative discussions to come. And do check out our videos from previously. Today we have the wonderful Cynthia with us, and what a privilege it is to have her this month as we reflect and we discuss all things pride related, all things within the LGBTQ plus community, and really deep dive into some of the challenges and barriers, but also how we can be allies, how we can be advocates for those within the community, and really make everyone feel that they're in a safe and open environment to be their authentic selves. So thank you so much, Cynthia. It's great to have you again.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely a delight to be back and chatting with you today.
Amazing. And I love the headband as well, representing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is
So,
my visual protest for the month, because it's been such a hard year,
mm,
is to let people know that when I'm walking down the street, and because I tend to enjoy a lot of privilege in the way that I look, and therefore I pass in public and so forth, is I'm standing out and I'm letting people know that I'm that I'm here, that I'm queer, that I exist. I'm not going away, and we need to have the discussion about how we normalize
mm,
society to accept those who are perceived to be different.
yeah, no, certainly. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for that. And it's all welcome here on our platform, and we love to see it. So thank you so much for bringing that to our discussion today
You're
and to
welcome.
our podcast. It's great to have. As we're going to get into a lot of interesting
Mhm.
discussions, and people will probably be wondering and asking a lot of questions as to how they can be an ally, how they can support. And there are also some people that perhaps don't understand. So hopefully we
Yeah.
can create that space today that will allow them to reflect on some of the topics that we've had. So
Mhm.
before we get into the beast of it and the
Yeah.
depth of it all, feel free to give us a bit of an introduction about yourself, your story, your background. That would be
Sure.
great.
Absolutely. Um, well, I mean, sometimes your story, it's never interesting to you. So the short version would be, for the first 50 years of my life, I was very socialized and um, pressured into living the life that was assumed based upon my genitalia at birth. So
Mm,
as a man, and that was up to 50. And at the age of 50, I was a senior executive, a C-suite executive in charge of technology with an organization. And I came out. And the journey was not coming out as gay, but to actually realize that I'd been living a lie, that since 4 years old, I have known who I've been. I just bowed to the pressure put upon me through socialization
mm,
of adapting to who they wanted me to be, not who I actually was. And at the age of 50, I began the journey um, to become myself. And unfortunately, through that journey, um, I was disowned by my birth family. I lost my marriage of 32 years at the point that it was official. And the first year with my children was very, very difficult. There was very little communication. Thankfully, now 7 years later, we have rebuilt those relationships and we have reconnected in an absolute new way,
mm,
and kind of moving forward. Now through that exercise, I also left that executive career because I found that it actually wasn't aligned to what I wanted to do and what I found kind of, if you will, heart-driven, heart-centered work.
mm,
And so I moved into the D&I space, specifically focusing on diversity education and training related to everything to do with gender. And so that's kind of where I've gone along the way. I've lived in 6 different countries in doing this. I've been fortunate to deliver over 400 events for organizations around the world in over 30 different countries. So I have been very blessed to really, be able to take this message of acceptance without understanding that we'll probably dive into a bit. But it really is the beginning place for folks to learn how to deal with such a diverse workplace and a society, and they really struggle to try and figure out how to fit in. And so, as I like to say, with one leader with two genders worth of experience, I love to bring that to every engagement that I do with organizations in helping them begin the journey of learning acceptance as a way to deal with diversity in their workplace. And it could be their clients, it could be their investors, stakeholders in general, because the world is very diverse, always has been. It's not a new thing, and it's just that we're much more aware of it. We're much more awake and aware that the world is this diverse, and we're all learning how to deal with
Yeah. And I think we're all aiming to, well, some, I'm not going to put everyone, but I think we all to an extent are looking to unlearn, because there is a lot within our socialization, as you said, and this sense of normalization. And I would love to dig in, how norms have created such a space where it has othered people, no matter what their background is. There's a real sense of othering due to this kind of standardized norm of what is perceived to be right and what
it.
is perceived to be not right.
Yeah.
And I think there is a lot of unlearning of that behavior, because we've kind of been indoctrinated. And maybe I'm going to sound like um really crude, but it is from those white supremacist institutions
Mhm.
and structures and systems of power that has really led us to believe that one thing is the norm and the other thing is not. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of unlearning that we have to do throughout this process. And as we enter and engage in more conversations and people are more comfortable to be open with who they are, we are now trying to find ways to get back to that. But coming back to one of the points you mentioned, and I guess one of my
Yeah.
first questions, and we're going to start from the personal outwards, because I
Okay.
think who you are as a person has really impacted the work that you do outside. But what my first question, and I think a lot of people, and even I'm a bit curious,
Okay.
is why wait until you're about 50 to really be your authentic self?
Yeah. Great question. uh, yeah. You know what? There's a couple of different ways to look at it. One is I am who I am today because of the journey that I've been on. And I believe that we all find in our spirituality
Mm,
that there's a right time to do certain things. And for
mm,
me, everything aligned at the point that, if you will, that I was awoken to facing the
mm,
decision of that I'd been hiding. The only decision was ever made is that I chose to bow to social pressure to be
mm,
the person they wanted me to be rather than being the person I always knew, again, consciously since 4 years old, that I
mm,
knew I was.
mm,
And lots of things. I mean, I always share the example that it was, you turn 50, that makes you question a lot of things in life. Uh, so there was that element, and it's kind of, who am I? Have I achieved what
mm.
I wanted to in life? Those
Yeah.
kinds of things. The other one was my youngest child, my daughter, was graduating high school in North America at the time. So, for 18 plus years, I guess 20 with all the primary school,
Mhm.
I was her parent, right? And I
Mm,
had a role, but not an identity.
mm,
And now all of a sudden, she was leaving that school system. My eldest, my son, he was off into uni already. And it was that place that it struck, and it was like, okay, I lost that part of my identity. So at 50 and my daughter graduating, I'm going, okay, there's two elements. And
mm,
the third and final that was really contributing at the time was I was kind of on an effort to get healthy. through various different things that I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came to weight loss, because I was almost 300 pounds at the time, I began this program, and it was much more kind of whole food eating, um, uh, more vegan based. So it was very healthy. And the reality was that when I started the program, you kind of make a commitment of why are you doing this, like that kind of North Star. And so for me, the very first North Star was I wanted to do this and get healthy so I can retire and travel the world. I was on the program for 3 months, fell off the wagon. That was it. Okay. Step back. Let's restart. Okay. Maybe I missed the fact that I forgot my spouse in that. So, okay, I want to start this program again to get healthy, to retire and travel the world with my spouse, my wife at the time. Okay. Was on the program for 6 months, fell off the wagon. Went back one more time. And at this point, the identity questions were very loud in my life and what I'm living and experiencing. And I finally said to myself, and I wrote it on paper for the first time, and I said, I want to get healthy and give Cynthia, because I had named myself at the time, Cynthia, a body to start her life with.
Wow.
And boom, I lost 80 pounds.
Wow.
I'm still have elements of that life in what I do today. For instance, looking at sugars and oils and, carbs and so forth, lots of different aspects, still a part of it. I'm not 80 pounds down, but I still have most of that weight has not come back. And because I'm living a much more authentic, much more wholesome life, related to that. And that for me was that epitome that it took that long to happen. I talk about the idea of it took me 48 years to learn the language just to talk to myself about it. But it took me 50 years to actually have the courage to say or do anything about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is very powerful. And I think I've heard stories about celebrities and the well-known Kris Jenner who talked about her transition, shall I say, in becoming I forgot what they call themselves now. I can't remember what their name is now. But that was a famous case that came out, and she came out very late after her career in athletics.
You're talking about
Caitlyn Jenner, yes.
Yes.
I couldn't remember what her name was. But that was a very famous case, and for me, it was the first time I've seen something so public as someone who isn't a part of that community, and wondered why now. And we even ask that, not even talking about our sexuality, we ask that in life about a lot of things, like why are we doing this now? And I think there has to be very powerful reasons, and like you said, there's a spiritual element that something works inside of you, which gives you that indication, whether you believe in God, the universe, or whatever. There is something internal within you that gives you that kind of message to say, okay, it's now the best time to do so. And I think we all wait for that.
We do.
I think even for myself, being in my late 20s, oh my gosh, I'm aging myself backwards. I started to realize I came out of a relationship of 7 years, and I even questioned myself, am I who I want to be? Is this me? And we go through those different phases in our lifetime. But you said something really interesting, and you said you knew since you were about 4 years old.
Correct.
And what do you, if you can bring us back to that point, how did you know at that time something was different about you, or this is not who you quite are?
Sure. It's intriguing, and with a sense of humor, Lady Gaga is right. We are born this way.
Yes.
And the reality is that, obviously when you're born, I don't have language skills. And but there's an innate knowing who you are. So by 4, I knew that I wasn't this person that I was supposed to be. And my recollections of 4 were, you know, being told to, be the boy that you're supposed to be, man up, boys don't cry. And all of those are memories that I have, and the fragments of what life was like at 4, which to me says that I probably was clearly demonstrating much more feminine traits at 4 years old. But I gave into that social pressure by, at that time, my parents, clearly, who were wanting me to be the person they thought I was, just because the doctor, who could not see my entire identity when I was born, just as he can't see anybody's, and he based an entire decision of how my life was supposed to go based upon a set of genitalia, which is not the only biological component, by the way, that affects this conversation. Although not everything is biology, there are many other elements that come into it. So the reality is that at 4, I had this innate knowing that I was not this person I was being told to be. And the more that I tested the waters of trying to kind of see how my identity emerged, the more that I began to feel comfortable that this is who I am. This is who I've always been. And it's not that I wish at 4 that I could have been me, because then I wouldn't be me who I am today. So it's not a matter of looking back and say, oh, I wish I woulda, coulda. It's, no, look, that journey shaped who I am today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's what we go through in life is the kind of defining factor of who we become. And I think
Yeah.
without those experiences, and I like the word that you use, even like fragments, in our lifetime, we don't quite understand the whole journey or the bigger picture,
Right.
to say the least. So and I guess if you take us back at a time where you were a young boy at the
Yeah.
time, um, what was the kind of conversations around the LGBTQ plus community, or were there even any kind of perceptions or anything? What was the narrative surrounding that period of time?
Um, yeah, I mean, depending kind of which time frame you want to go back into, the reality was, say, through my teens, that would be 70s into the 80s.
Okay. Yeah.
And so during that cycle, you were hearing bits and bobs about the LGBTQ community, which wasn't even called that at the time. Most of it was kind of like, the gay community,
Lesbian.
or some other derogatory term. Again, you got to realize that at that point, I was living with an immense amount of white privilege in, kind of middle income North America.
Oh.
Even though that's not where I was born, but that aspect really influenced kind of how I saw. So as I just did a post on my blog, and I talked about the fact that during the later years, which would be probably my early 20s into my 30s,
Yeah.
I realize I don't look that much older, but I am.
You look fabulous.
Yeah, thank you. As do you today, by the way. But no, the reality was that, the idea of kind of, gay marriage was coming up and in the news. And I remember with such disdain that I had. I mean, I was one of those people who was going, well, no, it can't be marriage, but it could be, a civil union. It could be a partnership, could be whatever. And you know what? It's one of those examples where until the shoe was on the other foot and I was part of the community, I did not realize the beauty and the simplicity of the love of two people, regardless if they happen to be both men or both women, and why they cannot enjoy the same privilege of
Yeah.
being married. And yeah, and for that, deeply, deeply apologize to those who may have been influenced by the way that I was thinking, with many others in society. And it was hurtful, and it was discriminatory, and it was bigoted. And I have learned from that in the work that I do today. And yeah, I am part of that community, and therefore it is much more closer to my heart, in realizing the actual impact, even back then, because this is pre-AIDS, even way
Yeah.
back then, that, oh my gosh, what was going on. And that is a really hard lesson to learn. But I am so thankful that I'm now able to take that and incorporate a very hard lesson like that into something that I do today, which is why, rather than people experience doing what I did, I try and teach the idea of acceptance. And acceptance is not agreement. It doesn't mean that somebody agrees with whatever they perceive my lifestyle might be, the whole bit. Look, as human beings, we are so complex. The totality of our identity is so complex. Sometimes we're not even sure of our own identities, right? I mean, you do not need to be LGBTQ plus identifying to not know your identity.
Yeah.
And that's why we're always on personal journeys of discovery and learning about ourselves. And
Yeah.
so the idea is, if you're not even sure of all of yourself, then how can you even begin to think that you actually know somebody better than they know themselves? And in doing so, all we simply do is ask you to accept they are human beings. That's it. Not
Yeah.
asking you to agree. And we definitely don't want you to tolerate such a very negative word. We don't want to
Yeah.
be tolerated. What we
Yeah.
want to do is we want to be accepted. And through acceptance, we can actually create, kind of relationships with people through dialogue. Doesn't mean they become friends, but it means we're not enemies.
Yeah.
And it is so easy to create an enemy of somebody, but it takes work and it takes investment in having conversations with that person, and even perhaps developing a relationship in order to create allies. And
Yes.
that's what I have learned through this journey is acceptance without understanding is the first step into being curious, because you can't start a conversation about, okay, look, I don't get this, I'm curious. And the questions are, why this? Why did you? Though, why is a question we ask to gain understanding. And it's very normal, because if you think about the way we've been raised since children, that is exactly everything we've ever been taught.
Yeah.
Why is the sky blue? Why does 2 + 2 = 4? And so on, and right through work. I mean, I used to be a technology executive, and one of the troubleshooting tools that we had to get to root cause analysis was the 7 why technique in order to gain understanding. But if you begin with understanding, which means if I don't understand you, I cannot accept you. And that's what we see happening today. We
Yeah.
need to reverse that and go, I accept you. I don't understand you, but I accept you without understanding. And together through dialogue, you can grow to acceptance with understanding. Remember, that does not mean agreement. It just means that we can actually coexist and live in society together.
Yeah. No, I think that is so true and so powerful, because there's a lot of time we come into situations where we think we know, or we have a perceived understanding, and therefore that, because we understand, we tend to either attract to it, or we tend to run away from it. And by running away, we then build narratives and discourse of hate, of discrimination, of distastefulness. And I think, because we think we know what we know, therefore we can have an opinion. And no matter what that opinion may be, hurtful or not, we start generating some sort of narrative around it. But
Yeah.
I love what you said. We need to reverse that and look at acceptance. And for me, as and this is why, for me, probably this conversation is more for me than anyone else
Okay.
in our audience. But
No
that's okay.
worries.
Take that. Um, and for me, it's, I am curious, and because I'm not part of that community, but I've seen beyond that. I see that there is a human You know, we all have, you know, we were all put on this world together, so we might as well learn to live together at least.
Yes.
Um, we're
Yeah.
all human. We're not
Yeah.
alien to one another as much as society or political institutions try to
Yeah.
make us become.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we all have a common goal in trying to get to where we want to be in life, and that is being our authentic selves, no matter what that may look like. So
Exactly.
me, I very much am always questioning and always wondering, okay, why do people do this? Or, and it's not even just people, but you know, as you rightly said, things in general. Why do we do it that way and not this way? And it's not for me to gain a full understanding. It's for me to continue to be curious and, okay, this is how it is, but
Mhm.
I want to understand more as to why this is why it is.
Yeah.
So I think that is so, and for me it's really reassuring as well, the fact that I can still remain curious,
Mhm.
you know, despite whether I may agree or, you know, like you rightly said, it's not about agreement, it's
Yeah.
about accepting, but without understanding, and for me that is very powerful.
Yeah.
And I
Thank you.
guess coming back to, you know, we're in the working world.
Mhm.
What do you now perceive are the barriers that people within the LGBTQ plus community face?
There's many. I
Mm,
mean, there are a lot, which is why people talk about, our human rights. And
mm,
you hear simple examples being shared, to be able to walk down the street with your partner,
yeah.
especially if they're a same-sex partner,
Mhm,
that, without kind of that judgment, right? Because to,
mm,
to live a life of acceptance is to learn to live with less judgment. I mean, look,
mm,
we're all
mm,
human. We're going to pass judgment. I am not I teach it and I'm not perfect. I catch myself judging, and then I have to
mm,
stop myself and step back and go, well, why am I judging this? Why can I
yeah.
not just accept it? And so I have to constantly, keep doing that. But that's because
Mm,
I'm aware, because I've become consciously aware
yeah.
of
Yeah.
all of this. So within the community at large, we have some basic rights. If you look at what's going on in the world, and it's not just America, it's not just the UK. The
Mhm,
fact is it's happening in many, many places concurrently right now. And what we're seeing is efforts to roll back the rights that have been gained. So,
mhm,
the rights to have same-sex relationships that are not illegal. That fight is ongoing because there's places that have never made it legal, and
yeah.
there's places that have made it legal that there's some rhetoric and talk, and in fact there's actually some legislative efforts to take that away. And of course from
Mhm,
that means same-sex marriage. They're again, some efforts are trying to roll that back, and same-sex adoption rights, and even
mm,
within that is and certainly within the queer community, there's the idea of reproductive rights, which of course all women, including trans women, trans men, non-binary and gender non-conforming folks, who all have the capability to give birth, to deal with it. And I mean, I'm 57. I'm not about to go on the journey, but I I could actually get a uterine transplant. It's been done 100 times in kind of over history, and that could create the opportunity for me to actually carry a child to birth. It would have to be delivered by cesarean, but I could
mhm,
deliver a child that way. So I include all of the identities because I think one of the things that we see happening is that the move that I was talking about that is attacking those rights is also attacking women's
mhm,
rights to access to birth control
yeah.
and to autonomy over our own bodies,
Mhm,
and access to proper health care,
mm,
because
mm,
m- medicine does not seem to factor in a woman's body into the healthcare regime. They
mm,
just adapt male perceived
yeah.
processes to fit women. And I think, and certainly I can't speak to it, but I perceive that that is being felt by the Black and ethnic minority community that again, some of those rumblings, but I think at least I think at a very public level, we're not seeing or maybe feeling it because George Floyd was not that long ago. And everybody's going, okay, hang on. Like we just went through this tumultuous period of learning that we should have done hundreds of years ago. But our privilege has been blocking us. And now we're a bit more aware and awake. So guess what? Maybe not quite there. So what you're seeing is the most marginalized of the marginalized, which is right now the trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming community is suffering the brunt, as if you will, as that spearhead of attacks on rights, of either denying rights that we've never had or trying to take away rights that we have fought very hard to gain. And I get it, because just in saying that phrase, of the transgender, gender non-conforming, non-binary, that is what we refer to as the the trans umbrella. And at least by identity, it's pretty diverse. And so it's very difficult to perhaps someone who has none of the understanding, none of the awareness, to see some of the similarities in that it's about a person's identity. And in doing so, realize that there are people at different stages kind of through that I'll share with your audience like a very quick lesson that I learned recently. So when I came out in 2016, I was told that I'm transgender. And I said, oh, well, you meant transsexual. I went, no, transsexual is an old word. We don't use it. In North America, that's how it's perceived. But when I came to the UK, I met folks who identify as transsexual. And as I've gone back and looked into the history of the identity, which comes from Hirschfeld in Germany, and if people are familiar with that, his was the first library that his books were burnt, and his books were over 20 years of research and studies and analysis of this community. And they attacked his clinic. They killed some of the folks that worked there. And that happened in Nazi Germany. And so that shows us some of the parallels, why we hear some of the conversation today going there, because there is this idea of trying to erase identities again. And because we're so diverse, it's really hard for folks to fathom where it fits in. So for me, the lesson was I have added the word transsexual as a valid identity back into my lexicon. When I talk about this, transgender is the umbrella. It is a specific identity. And within that are many different identities, including transsexual, which by definition, even though it's a word I don't use, I'm actually transsexual. That is, and I think it's just, I'm still working through what I've learned about that word and why I find it so offensive to me personally, because there are many others who go, no, that's who we are. And in doing so, we actually ignore their needs in the conversation, because in this idea of creating this trans umbrella, we've actually erased their identity. And so there's always something to learn.
And there are so many different kind of angles, and I guess people's own experience and what they feel comfortable in identifying as. But there's just so many, and it's so. And for me, it's so fascinating to really delve into how identity politics plays a wider part in all of this, and the things that it includes and it excludes, and then who's at the table doing or writing the narrative about it and who isn't. So there's always this constant battle. And even within the trans umbrella, we also have just not just the sexual identities, but the identities of people of color, people with disabilities, people from socioeconomic backgrounds, and that intersectionality of it all is so important. And I think I was actually doing some research just the other week around queer theory and using it more as a critical analysis rather than as as something that is.
Yep.
And what I found fascinating in doing that reading and some following readings from it is how even what we knew as what we know as queer theory, that had a certain perception and a certain look of it in
Mhm.
terms of it really kind of, I guess, looked at the experiences from those of white privileged backgrounds or white backgrounds,
Yep.
and it didn't quite fit the narrative in really looking and really being
Mhm.
critical of using queer theory as a
Yeah.
critical approach in really understanding the experiences of those that are non-white
Yep.
or that were of people with disabilities, and it really didn't take that into consideration. So you have things like crip theory that came as a result from discussions around people with disabilities within the community.
Mhm.
But it was just so interesting to look at queer theory from more, for me, from more of a critical analysis point of view,
Yeah.
to understand how people have been left out, even though they ascribed or identified as being part of that community.
Absolutely. And, for me, that was one of the awakenings. When I talk
Mm,
about this idea of, I always describe the idea of privilege, is like a set of blinders, like
mm,
a horse pulling a cart would wear, right? And
mm,
it really affects the way that you see the world. And that view, that filtered view, is bias, right?
yeah,
And if you have it from birth because of perhaps the color of your skin, or the family that you were born into, things you could not control, then that may be unconscious bias. And
mm,
the challenge here is that, we're now starting to realize, at least for me, it was take off those blinders. And honestly, the first thing I went is, okay, I see all the social injustice going on. Is this really how the world has been? Was I
mm,
really living that privileged of a life that
yeah,
I could not see all of this going on? It wasn't that I was ignoring it, it
yeah,
just was not in my visibility.
yeah,
And the problem is that once you learn to take off those blinders, I can't unsee social injustice. And so for me, I hear exactly what you're talking about. And the realization of how much white privilege that carries for me into societies that are systemically created to actually benefit me, whether or not I created them or so forth. The fact that I don't try and stop it or reverse it means I'm enjoying the privilege and doing absolutely nothing about it.
mm, yeah, yeah. No, and I totally agree. We need, and I love that analogy with the horse with the blinders on and removing the blinders. It's so
Yeah.
crazy when you actually remove that, you see the world in a very
Yeah.
different way, and you're just like, okay. Even for myself,
Mhm.
I had growing up in the Caribbean, I had a very limited purview of living on an island of only about 15,000 people. So you can imagine everything kind of looked and sound the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then coming to the UK, that was when my blinders came off, and I was just like, oh wow, there's a whole different world.
Yeah.
Um, so it's fascinating in how by just doing that we see the world, and then we enter this phase of acceptance without understanding, because we start asking questions, don't we?
Yep, we
So
do.
I think by doing that, it is really helpful.
Yeah.
And I guess coming, you know, back into the work sphere, we see now that pride is now one of the key things in the diary. Every June, we celebrate Pride
Yeah.
for 30 days. We have color change logos. We have, you
Yeah.
know, commitments coming out and different things going on.
Yeah.
And I guess from myself looking in and I'm positioning myself more as an ally here,
Yeah.
it all seems very performative, as we've seen with a lot of
Yeah.
things that happen in the D&I space.
Yes.
What are your perceptions or your, I guess, guidance as to how can organizations move beyond being, taking that a
Yeah.
formative approach?
Uh, Great question. I think one of the challenges that happens, that you're right. I mean, you see the color change. And of course, this year, some companies are challenging. Are they ready to deal with the pushback that will come from those who literally seem to be attacking anything with a rainbow? Thankfully, they seem to separate that when it comes to the NHS. Thankfully, the NHS has enough troubles. They don't need the
Yep.
fact that there's a rainbow logo being one of them.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you're right. I think there's been a lot of performative action, and some folks may be aware of kind of. There's been a hashtag going around. It hasn't gained a huge voice, but it's Pride 365. Right? Rather than say, look to hire me as a speaker, educator to come in and work with the organization in June, or doing transgender, visibility day or transgender awareness week in November. The fact is, I live this life 365 days a year. Pride is 365 days a year, because the core essence behind Pride, such as walking down the street every day and existing as a point of a protest, whether I wear the headband or not, it is that I exist 365 days a year. And when's the right time to educate and learn and so forth? Well, it's any time. Much as we need to learn about, those with disabilities, as we need to learn from the Black and ethnic minority communities, as we need to learn from women. There is so much from marginalized communities that we need to learn. And for clarity of your audience, women are the largest group of marginalized people on this planet. And so from my perspective, I absolutely include women when I look at marginalized communities and what we need to learn through it. And so it's not about fly your flag in colors. Absolutely. Do we want to? Sure. I would like to see it more often. And the whole idea is, when's the right time to educate or run that session, or bring in a series of education to help your leaders and your staff develop with a much more diverse, inclusive mindset all the time. And we don't want performative. Being performative is like going to the restaurant and the server seeing that there's a bunch of women that they'll be taking care of. And so rather than saying, hi, guys, which is very colloquial, although very gendered, I won't go there right now. But the last thing the women want is a hi, ladies, because that's simply a performative response to the perceived, because they don't know the identities of those people at the table. And so they make an assumption, and they are very performative in the way they greet them, which they don't normally do any other time. Rather, I would see people go, oh, how about I go, hi, folks, hi, everyone, or just simply, welcome, right? Like, you don't need to call out genders and identities in all these situations. Or you go into the office, right? You go, hi, team, right? Hi, everyone. Like, good morning, everyone. Whatever it happens to be, there are lots of ways to become inclusive 365 days a year in order to deal with that. Ladies and gentlemen, again, you go to, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our event. You don't need to, because you don't know in that audience who you're going to exclude. And so just learning the simplicity of some language tricks that are not difficult, in terms of how you could be more inclusive. And you know what? I'm not saying you have to be. I am just providing you some education and awareness if you want to be.
Because at the end of the day, we all have a choice. And if you want to be in it, you can. If you don't, it's okay. But if you are in that space, at least allow and create a space where everyone feels welcomed, where everyone feel like they belong somewhere. And the first thing you don't want to do is exclude them by simple ways of language. And don't get me wrong, I've been, even from our last chat, I said, hey guys, or something like that, or part. and I immediately took myself back, and I'm just like, no, Velka, this is not the way how to address. But we get caught in that moment. But it's being consciously aware of it. And I think that's what it's important. It's being consciously aware that, okay, this was something that I recognize that could potentially alienate someone from a discussion. And then finding ways to overcome that. And I think being very transparent and honest with yourself. I think a lot of
Yes.
us hide behind the shadows of, oh, I don't want to engage in that conversation
Mhm.
because I don't want to offend anyone.
Yeah.
Just ask. Or if you say it incorrectly, someone will correct you.
Yeah.
And I think it's down to people on the receiving end to not take it as an offense as well, because not everyone is aware. And it is our
Yeah.
job, well, not our job, but it's our
Yeah.
kind of responsibility, shall I say, to really
Mm.
allow people to know if something is offensive or not to yourself, because what may be offensive to you may not be offensive to another.
Yes. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, what would you like? My final question: what would you like to see in the future in regards to the LGBT plus community? What are your hopes
Mhm.
um, for the community, and what can allies perhaps can do going forward?
Well, you know, when I talk about acceptance, I really do mean that I would love a world where everybody can just learn to accept each other and all our differences
Mm,
and learn to coexist.
mm,
I realize that's a panacea, a utopia that I'm talking about. We are human, and we've
mhm,
never, as far as I know, we've never enjoyed it to date.
mm,
And we probably, may never get there, but much like many great things that are worth working towards, it is
mm,
aspirational in nature. So perhaps the idea of getting towards a more utopian, equal world, it is
mm,
an aspirational goal. And I'm very encouraged by the youth. Now, for me, that means a lot of people are youth to me. Um, but the reality is that probably if you are 30 something and under, 35 and under, I
mhm,
consider you in the youth. And many of them get it. They get the idea of what we need to do in terms of climate justice, in terms
mhm,
of pretty much most aspects of social justice. And they're really smart. And so the idea is they are hope of that better
mhm,
tomorrow,
mm,
and they are what will take us on the journey. And I like to reference, they are not future leaders. When you look at your child and you go, they're a future leader, no, they're a
mhm,
leader today. And we
yeah,
just need to give them the opportunity to lead. We,
mhm,
as adults, we need to support them with what may be required. But at the end of the day, they know how to lead and they get it, and
yeah.
they can help lead us to a much brighter future that we can all benefit and enjoy.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think it's so true. And I see, as I'm in that bracket of the youth. I do see people within my age group and above, and even below, really advocating and really engaging in these conversations. I don't really like to use the term woke generation because it brings to me, sometimes people take that in a negative way.
Yes.
But in terms of my idea is they are awakened to the injustice that is happening around
Yeah.
us, because they've been in a world where they can take off their blinders a lot earlier than
Yeah.
perhaps those in the older generation had.
Yes.
So by being so much more open and so much more free, and yes, people have their cons in terms of social media, but we see a lot more because of social media
Yeah.
and the internet. We're able to reach audiences from beyond. With the George Floyd murder, look how that catapult across the world and impacted
Mhm.
almost every inch of
Yeah.
all continents. That was because we live in an age where these things can no longer be silenced or
Yeah.
cocooned into one aspect. They're allowed, no matter what city or state you're in,
Hmm.
there are allowed instances of injustice, and
Oh,
people will
yeah.
get caught out, and the youth will call them out.
Yeah.
So I think we live in
Yeah.
we're moving towards a generation where we're a lot more awakened to the injustices that are happening, and I think people are being people are having a much more emphasis in, okay, how can I play a part in changing this? And I think it's promising.
Yes.
um it sucks that it's taken this long, but I
Yeah.
think slowly, and I'm a little bit utopian in that sense that we will get there,
Yep.
and we will hopefully all be in a space where these things are no longer, confined to a month or a day
Oh
or
yeah.
a specific
Yeah.
time,
Yep.
but it's something that we regularly have conversations around, and
Yep.
um so yeah, so that's I guess my hope as well, in terms of all aspects of diversity, in terms of
Yes.
everyone being their authentic self. So yeah, that's what I hope for too.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Well, thank you so much, Cynthia, for joining us once again on our podcast. It was
You're
great to have
welcome.
you, and thank you for being so transparent and open about your story, as well. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with our audience. And I wish you all the best in what you do. And I am going to make it a commitment to keep these conversations going, even if it means our audience have to see you again. To
See
bring
what
a
I
new
learned. See what I
perspective
learned for
for us.
next time.
So no, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you soon. Take
You're
care.
so welcome. Take care. Happy Pride, everyone.